Welcome back to the Forge. Today we're going to be talking about why men stall under pressure and how the nervous system reality or how disbelief disables action. And really, it all comes down to, I believe, in a lot of times, obviously, as you're sharing here in the notes, there's something to do with our nervous system, but there's also some core things that happen in our subconscious as well that brings us forward. So, welcome back to the show, Jason. And let's get this thing started.
So one of the reasons why I love this topic so much, and thanks again for having me back. It's always great to speak about this kind of stuff. So one of the reasons why this is so important is because when you look at everything that people do, whether they're getting angry, they retreat, they freeze, or they overthink, or they chase, or they avoid, or whatever it might be, when you're looking at why people do things, or when you look at the thing that people are doing, it's important to ask the why. And the why always comes back to one core point, which is survival. Everything that we do is based on our ability to survive and survive in different circumstances. And it's really vital to be able to look at these things and appreciate them for what they are, rather than looking at something that you're doing and then criticize yourself or have any kind of judgment over yourself as having a flaw or having something that's wrong with you or anything like that, because that doesn't do any good. It doesn't serve any purpose for you to judge yourself based on what you believe you should or should not be doing, when you are acting in a way that you have absolutely no control over. And you're doing things that your survival instinct has predetermined that you're going to do. And oftentimes it does these things because of a lack of training. And this is really important because the more you train your system to do something, the more you can condition it to act in a certain way. You can't get rid of the survival instinct, but you can train it to act in a certain way, similar to how you would train a pet to respond to certain cues or to take certain action based on command. And our survival system is the exact same kind of concept. It needs to be trained and it needs to be conditioned. And one of the things that really need to be understood, that I think is the most least understood and also the least appreciated, is this idea of why we freeze. And that's why I think it's something that we need to really talk about today.
Yeah, that is something that's very valuable. I agree with you. I've experienced it in my own life many times, multiple times, especially when it came to heated conflict with my ex-wife. Um, and and I mean, even when we're interacting with things that we're doing in life and stuff like that, right? Like there's still points in my life at times where it's like, okay, wait a second, something's not quite feeling right here, and you want to crawl into a hole, you want to hide or whatever, and yeah, like obviously, yeah, there's something like you said, like in our that's built in our framework that we've been conditioned into. It's something that it's a trait that we have learned over time due to experiences that we've had, and just like those fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all those types of things have been conditioned, that we've been kind of conditioned to learn how our bodies work and stuff like that. We can, as you suggested, relearn, right? Being as May 4th, may the 4th be with you, Jason. Yoda famously said, you have to unlearn what you have learned, right? And that really applies to what we're talking about here today is going through the process of unlearning these traits or these responses that have been embedded in us over time, like I said, through experiences and other things. And so so going through that process of what is it to learn different ways of how can we respond in a different way to the way we traditionally do.
And to the concept of unlearning, I think the best way to unlearn, and this sounds very counterintuitive, but the best way to unlearn is to focus on understanding. because it isn't necessary that you have to learn something new. You have to understand what exists. And there's who said it? There was someone who said that when things create a pattern, it's almost like a river that runs in a certain direction and eventually becomes, or it's perceived to be, unstoppable. It's just going to flow in that one direction, and it's going to seem like this is a reality now. What people don't understand is that when you understand the flow and the current, when you understand everything you can about how that river flows, you then understand everything that made it possible for it to function the way it is. And that creates the beginning of understanding, because once you understand how it got that way, you can also understand how to make it turn and shift. Because really, it's all about the erosion that then gathers momentum. So you've got two things: erosion and momentum. And these are the two things that make a river possible and make it feel like a daunting, unchanging, immovable force of nature. Behavior works the exact same way. It's about understanding how the erosion took place, where the momentum is going, and what makes it move so powerfully. Because by understanding that, you can understand then how to erode in specific ways, how to shift momentum. You're not trying to stop things, because stopping would be very, very bad. What you're doing is you're looking at the shift, how to make certain shifts so that while it's flowing in a direction that is going to be more purposeful, more sustainable, and create better outcomes for you. And this is what the beauty of the human experience is. We can look at a river and say, okay, I understand that it has to flow. It doesn't necessarily have to flow in this way, going in this direction, reaching this point. It can be changed. We just have to understand how to do that. And that's really what is all about this unlearning. It's about a deeper understanding, creating a deeper understanding, and the ability to know that beneath every single system, there is a process. And when you can understand that process, you can begin to understand the system. And that's when you can be able to change it. But without that understanding, it's impossible to change.
Yeah, and what you're alluding to is that there's the ability for us as humans to be able to, in a sense, separate ourselves from the situation and look at something from an objective point of view, or even in some ways a subjective kind of point of view, and take that element of ourselves being, say, the victim in a situation, or even looking at from another perspective, right? We have the ability a good majority of us anyways have the ability to actually remove ourselves from the situation, look at all the different points of information that we have in regards to that, and then we are able to then draw different conclusions from the information that we're able to draw from that. And that's something that's actually a very powerful gift that I believe we as humans have been created with, as you've alluded to, and it's something that I'm not sure if there is another species that we are aware of on Earth, anyways, that have that capability.
Oh, sure. Well, as far as the thing that makes humans so unique, it isn't the fact that we can think logically. There are plenty of species that can do the thinking. But the real thing that separates humans from any other species is our ability to think about what we think about. It's that meta awareness. And that's what really creates the possibility for change. You go through any other species, dogs, chimpanzees, dolphins, consider some of the more intelligent species than humans, which is a laugh. And really, all of these creatures can think things through, but they can't think about what they think about. They have no meta awareness, which means they can't just change their thinking like that because of their awareness of it. And so this awareness is exclusive to human beings, and that's really where the magic lies. And so when you can think about what you think about, that's when you create understanding. It's more than just going through the motions. This is one of the reasons why two of my favorite philosophers, especially in regards AI. Their names are Federico Faggin and Sir Roger Penrose. These are both doctors in their field. Federico Faggin, he was the one who created the first microprocessor, and Sir Roger Penrose is a Nobel laureate in quantum physics. And they have both stated emphatically that AI will never reach the intelligence of humans simply because it can never think about what it thinks about. It'll never have that sense of reasoning of what it reasons about. And so there is no meta awareness. And this is the thing that will always be exclusive to human beings, which is a real gift. It can be a curse, especially if you don't use it correctly. But for the most part, it's a gift. It is the ability to understand that we as human beings are exclusively able to do that, thinking about what we think about, having that meta awareness, at least on Earth. I can't speak to any other species, but here on Earth, we're the only ones who have that capacity. And so when we're talking about this idea of understanding what freeze is, this is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about getting a meta awareness of what it means to have the survival mechanism, how it impacts you, and what it's going to mean as you move forward, conditioning yourself to act in a way that is going to serve you better than the basic raw instinctual impulse.
Yeah, and that's a valid point that you bring up as well, right? Like, when I think about these kinds of things, it's like, um, this is something that's it's actually, like you said, very unique to us. I mean, we can, outside of the spiritual realm or other beings that whether we want to go down that rabbit hole or not. But that's not what this that's not what this podcast is about. But us as humans, yeah, we have that unique ability, and and that's something that's very. It's like also recognizing that we also have that moment of pause. Because these conditions that we go through, like we said, these automatic nervous system things that we've been conditioned into based off of what we've experienced and stuff like that. We also have the ability to recognize that there is a moment of pause between the stimulus and the reaction that we put forward. And in that moment of pause, we have that ability to also now make the choice to choose a different action. And and that is a whole all part of everything that we're talking about today is is as we recognize that our system is under or we have this perceived threat and our nervous system is reacting and we have these one of these things that wants to come up. We have that moment of pause to actually go, wait a second, or even while we're experiencing it, we have the moment, okay, what's happening here? We have the moment to reflect on what's happening if we choose to be in that space. And and uh, and yeah, that's something again that is very unique to us.
So the best way to talk about this is to really just go through it, help create understanding by looking at the parts that create the system. Because the freeze system is a very deliberate sense. And this is the sense of not knowing what to do next because you have no idea what to respond to because things are way too dynamic to consider what's happening. When the freeze happens, there's no direct danger to you, but the danger is possible. And the freeze happens because okay, I know that I have to do something. I'm not sure what to do because I have no idea what the response is going to create as far as a consequence. And the consequence is what matters most. What is the consequence going to be? So when we're looking at this in a systemized way, we're looking at many different things because we have to slow everything down because the problem is that things are moving way too fast. The freeze is happening because things are way too dynamic, happening way too fast. We have no idea what's going to happen next, and we have no idea what our actions are going to create as far as a consequence and how that consequence is going to happen, or what that consequence is going to have for us. So the first thing we need to do is recognize what is going on. There's this belief that something is off. And there's a tension that is rising. We have no idea what it means, especially as men. We have no idea what it means when we are talking in the sense of, like, say, a relationship, or say in a heated discussion. We have no idea what that tension means. And so we tend to stall in our decision making, and the words that we want to say just don't come, either because we have a lack of information, or because we have a lack of understanding what that information is going to do. There's this questioning period of, I don't know what is happening, I don't know what to do next, I'm just going to be still and silent. And then in that sense, we tend, when we look at things afterwards, after it's all played out, and things have kind of mellowed down, and we see that how we've acted on the situation, which is the metacognition. We begin to see that the we had this internal dialogue of something felt really serious, and while this was serious, I needed more information to be able to understand what to do next. And because I didn't have that information, I needed to wait before I took any action, because I had no idea what the consequence was going to be. But because they don't think, because most people don't think in that way, especially men, when we're looking back at the situation, if we're not looking at it with that kind of parameters, we default to a different kind of parameter, which is, I should have done something. We should on ourselves, and we place blame in areas because we don't understand what was going on. And so we might say things like, I froze, or I failed. Because I should have done something and I didn't, I failed. And we believe that this is a choice, when really the choice was made for us by instinct. And we would tend to see that frame as being, that freeze as being cowardice, or that the freeze was us not having the willpower to make a tough decision. And it has nothing to do with what it is. But oftentimes, and I've been guilty of that many times, where I've oftentimes, before understanding this, I would say to myself, I should have done this, I should have done that. Why didn't I actually do something? Why did I freeze? Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I take action? Why was I so stupid? It was something I might have told myself. And really, it's not about the fact that you were stupid, cowardice, or anything else. What it was is, this was a built-in survival response. Because when you were back 100,000 years ago, when you were still hunting things with sticks and rocks, when something was rustling in the bushes, you had to stop and take inventory to find out whether it was going to be a saber-toothed tiger jumping out at you, or whether it was a kid playing and saying, brah, surprise, because that's what kids did even back then. And it was important to be able to judge if it was a threat or not, or if it was something I had to take action on or not. And the exact same thing is happening, but in a society where there were rules, there is guidance, and there are laws to make sure that people act in a civilized way. That freeze ends up happening more in a social state, where we don't know how to react or respond to the person we are speaking with, because we have no idea what that is going to create as far as a consequence. And so what we do is we get down on ourselves because we believe we should have acted in a certain way, when that wasn't even possible. Because if it was possible, you would have done that. And it's really important for people to understand that reality dictates how things happen. And the reality of the situation is, most people are ill-equipped to deal with their freeze condition in a more resourceful way, because they've never trained it to do so. And that training is really what matters. Being able to understand that when you have that moment of hesitation, what it is that there is this real-time sense that something could happen, something could go really wrong, where if you said it did the wrong thing, you could be faced with a moment of rejection, or of being felt like you were less than. And back in a society where tribes were the answer to survival, rejection meant you were cast out of the tribe. You were vulnerable, and people who were vulnerable usually met their ends much sooner. And so you've got that ancient belief that the freeze, or you got that ancient belief that if you freeze, you can evaluate. But in a time where information is very fast, and we're applying that same reaction to social situations, it becomes more of a sense of, okay, how do I interact with this person? And if we don't train it correctly, we just stop. And if we don't understand why, we tend to get down on ourselves more than anybody else will. We tend to be our worst critic in this, when really all that we needed to do was figure out, how do I train myself and condition myself to act better.
Yeah, you're right there. I often say this. You know, we are our own worst enemy in so many different ways when it comes to how we speak to ourselves, how we treat ourselves. You know, like as you said there, the I should have. Um, I mean, I've played those stories in my head. I don't know how many times throughout my life, and even to this day, it still creeps into my head. Right? Well, I should have said this, or I should have done that, or maybe I could have done this differently. You know, and and sometimes it's kind of in a positive light where it's like, okay, yeah, I recognize, I did this or whatever, blah blah blah. But yeah, oftentimes there's that negative connotation to it, that is that shaming or that blaming or whatever. Looking at myself in a negative light, and that triggers a lot of stuff, like those that triggers a lot of energy within our bodies, and our body is, I mean, that you can say our nervous system or whatever, but that just triggers a lot of stuff within our body that kind of like almost like solidifies. You know, I remember, uh, we can talk about like through our neural pathways and stuff, right? If you develop a habit, right, to where things become like, say, like muscle memory and stuff like that, right? It's because you're doing repetitive motions, or you're doing something repetitive all the time until it becomes like second nature. And when we're doing things like this to ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves, all that kind of stuff, that is as well is like a trained behavior that we've been teaching ourselves, and it reinforces our nervous system every time we get that sense, every time we get that feeling, to behave in that same way.
Exactly. And it's part of the process is we have to really understand how our nervous system acts and reacts. Because the only way that we can truly change things is if we have that understanding. And that understanding is what creates that unlearning of bad habits, that unlearning of assumptions. And that's through being able to truly understand what actually is. So, in regards to the nervous system and the way that we react in five predictable ways. And every person does this. Every person is the exact same way. They have, it might look a little bit different based on their culture or based on their upbringing, but there are five basic ways in which um, in which we handle stress, how we react to things. And you alluded to it at the very beginning, which are fight, flight, freeze, feign, and fawn. And these have to do with the development of how the human beings were created through eons, thousands and thousands of years of development, even back down to the dinosaurs, really, because human beings are the accumulation of three different survival sets. You've got the lizard set, which is basically the feigning aspect. When lizards or reptiles tend to, and this includes amphibians, when they tend to react to a stress, like they're about to be eaten, they feign death. They lower their heart rate to a point where it is almost imperceptible. They look like they're dead. And this works because a predator will not eat something that is dead because it can make them sick and kill them through food poisoning. And so they will tend to gloss over something that appears dead. And that worked for them. Unfortunately, mammals, so that includes humans, don't have that capacity to feign death because of our need for oxygen. So if we did that, we'd suffer what's known as hypoxia or oxygen deprivation, which can lead to brain death. And that's never a good thing. So what we've done is we have instead turned it into of more of feigning of emotional response, and this is either through shutdown or through feigning, basically lying as a response of deceiving ourselves for what we are feeling in order to survive an interaction. So fight and flight, that's pretty understood. You're either going to confront something or you're going to want to run away from it. The freeze is part of that lizard mammal hybrid where we stop and we assess the situation. Feigning is, like I said before, we're deceiving others and ourselves to basically survive a situation. And then the fawn is really interesting. This was seen especially in captives or in children of abuse, where someone would they would notice that people would actually seek to gain favor of the abuser, of the person that they couldn't get away from or that they were trying to appease to the better nature of in order to avoid harm. And this was a great strategy that worked because it spoke to the person's ego that was in control, had the perceived power, and made it so that there was this relationship that was created. And this is what is often associated to um, the term is for when a abuse victim is seen to fall in love with their abuser. It really isn't love; it's more of a fawning that has become accustomed to, and so they've adapted it as a habit. And habits are basically things that we've done over time that then become automatic. And anything that you do enough times becomes a behavior. It becomes a habit, and that goes right into that river analogy. So the 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 freeze that we're speaking of is, specifically, it activates when the threat is feels real but unclear. It feels like it is imminent, but it's not necessarily what it means. And so there's this assessment period, and it's only after the period of assessment, after the threat is understood, that we take action. But oftentimes, after that freeze, we feel like we're only left with a few options because waiting too long to assess the threat, we tend to give up our leverage to understand how we can actually control the situation, or that at least that's what's believed. And so we believe that we are stuck with a certain set of options, and we don't like any of them. And so we tend to just go with what we believe is there, and then beat ourselves up afterwards. When really all that's happening is it's really a chemical response. We are dealing with something. We're seeing a perceived threat. We're getting a dump of hormones. We're seeing that we have an inability to do the things that we want to do, and that we're stuck doing the things that we have to do. And that lack of autonomy that we see it is something that we really dislike as people, especially in a period where we have strong societal margins that tell us that we know how we're supposed to behave.
Yeah, and the term you're looking for earlier was I believe Stockholm syndrome. Yeah, and it's quite often seen in situations where people are, say, in a hostage situation. There's been many accounts where because of the threat is so high in a hostage situation, there's been many times where the hostage themselves has gained an affection or an affinity to the person who was, the holding them hostage, and then oftentimes would be like, well, they're, then they'd start to drum up excuses for the person who had committed the crime, you know. But yeah, like when you talk about how our body goes through these hormones, all these different things happen. it also affects our ability to make decisions in the moment, and and or we don't want to make a decision in the moment, right? We want to overthink things, as you've alluded to before, because we're afraid of making a mistake in a decision that that could have some sort of perceived consequences that we don't know about, and and so then that could lead to avoidance or other things, and all those things are things that it's like, okay, we here we are. I've experienced them. I'm sure you have. I'm sure the people we're speaking to have experienced them as well. And and it goes. I mean, like, these are like what you just went through are all basically to give a basic understanding of what's happening in the body at this time, that kind of brings us to this place. And there's many layers to it, as we've talked to before, where some of the stuff are learned behaviors from childhood on forward, or even sometimes even our adult years, from different experiences that we've had, that have been ingrained into our bodies through our nervous system and stuff like that, that bring us to now kind of understanding why men actually freeze more often, and and that's something I think is really interesting to kind of really think about, because our audience here is obviously more geared towards men, and and there is some there's some reality to that, like, yeah. So I'd just like you to speak into that for a little bit.
So yeah, the reason why good men, and most men want to be good. Most men want to be of service. There's this biological need to be of service to the people that we um, align with, and we want to help and grow. It's a biological imperative. There's a whole biology behind us. But when men freeze, it's usually because, first of all, good men are going to rely on a certain model of understanding the world. Men work best when we have models of understanding of our world. And we rely on those models to understand the rules that are there, how order is created, because those are two rules, and order are two things that are really important to men. Understanding what is going to be predictable and understanding what is fair. And that last one, fairness, is more subjective than it is objective, because fairness is not necessarily something that is objectively quantifiable. And I've had this conversation with many people who try to argue with me about that. But then when you ask the question, what is fair? They have a hard time really being able to understand it. So it's those four things: the rules, the order, the predictability, and the fairness. The last one being more subjective. So when the model is violated, there's this kind of glitch that happens, because men are going to rely on that model in order to do things, because the brain wants to conserve energy. The brain is going to make up of a third of the amount of energy that you use in your body, which is crazy. Something that weighs about 8 pounds makes up a third of the energy that you use. And when it uses energy, it basically, for every hour that it spends actually working, it's like 3 hours of your body working, or something like that. It's a crazy comparison. The amount of workload that your brain has compared to everything else. So when it is working, it wants to conserve as much energy as possible. So it does something called heuristics, creating shortcuts. And so it's going to rely on these models to create these heuristics so that it can use less energy to do the exact same thing. This is why when we drive, we don't think about how we got to work. It's something we've just kind of created as a pattern, as a habit. We've created a heuristic. We know how to drive to work, so we don't have to think about it all. Same thing about when we do the things that are mundane. The mundane has basically become a heuristic. And so when the heuristics are violated, and we haven't trained our brain to deal with something that is abnormal out of the model, or out of the heuristic, our brain kind of glitches. And we're like, this doesn't compute. This doesn't work within the model that we've used. And I have no way of being able to plan for this because I haven't trained for this. This is why training is so important. And the brain believes that this should not be happening or that something it has broken. So not only that, but there's also this belief that men should stay composed. You shouldn't show emotion because emotion can be dangerous or it can be weak. It can show danger or weakness. Men who are unpredictable are considered dangerous, and men who are overly emotional are considered weak. Both of these are lies, by the way. But this is the perception that men have bought into. So they can't act the way they normally would in general because they have these two beliefs. They should be composed and they should not be emotionally charged. Combine that with the fact that now they are working off of a system that has failed them. And you've got this sense that they are powerless. Men believe they are powerless to do anything. And this is where the shame comes because they've basically been stripped of their autonomy to say you can't do anything because you're supposed to run off of a model. Oh, and by the way, when the model glitches, too bad. You can't do anything about it. You have to stay composed and you have to stay emotionally bland, for lack of a better word. And when men are met with those two conflicting rules, there's a sense of not only do they hesitate, but also there's the sense of they can only do things they have to do. This goes back to the idea of you can't do what you want to do. You have to do what you believe you are supposed to do. And so autonomy is stripped away, and you're left with very few options, all of which are disliked. And that is when men begin to self criticize. They begin to self implode. Basically, they see themselves as being weak or not good. Basically, people that they would not want to be surrounded with, and they see that within themselves. They feel like a hypocrite. They feel a huge sense of shame, and because they can't be emotionally forward, they have to stifle that down, which it just compounds the problem over and over again. It's a vicious cycle that men are saddled with. They aren't told how to deal with the actual world. They're told to deal with the model, and the model oftentimes breaks because people are dynamic. But because they aren't given the resources or the tools to deal with dynamic situations, they they respond in a way that they don't like. And yes, it is a poor response, but it's a poor response based on bad conditioning. And this is why understanding is so important, because when you understand how you are meant to respond, even in social situations, what your options really are, even if they are unfavorable. Who cares if they're unfavorable? Unfavorable to whom? To society at large, to a body of people who have decided that they want you controlled rather than they want you effective. I'm not going to buy into that. And the more men that decide that they are sick of buying into that, the more men are going to look for ways that they can deal with situations in a way that's going to be much more effective rather than complicit.
And the thing to realize is that this can happen to all spectrums of men, men who are that we can perceive as being high achievers. They look very successful on the outside because they've accomplished a lot of things in their lives and all this other kind of stuff. To men who are, on the opposite spectrum of that, where they're have low self esteem and have low self value and stuff like that. Like it happens to it happens to the full spectrum, and oftentimes we see this come up in varying different ways of behaviors and all this other kind of stuff, and I mean, yeah, it's quite the phenomenon. And and yeah, as you shared, right? Like there's a lot of things that are been as we've been talking or alluding to throughout this whole thing. A lot of social conditioning that has happened throughout this. There's family dynamics that come into play. You know how we witness our fathers. You know, as we grew up, how they led their lives and stuff like that, because we oftentimes emulate things that we've seen or been taught and stuff. And so there's many different things that contribute to this this idea of what happens when we are in this freeze moment. And and there, and then it also comes down to the idea of how we perceive ourselves. And there's that real sense of disbelief within ourselves that is the true enemy of all of this, right? Like, and I know for a long time, and even I guess I've shared before, right? Like I'm still, as far as I have come on my growth journey, when it comes to where I am today and stuff like that, I recognize there's a huge gap between where I was a few years ago to where I am today, and there's still areas where I can continue to grow in. And that's, I think, also the awesome part about today's journey, or about my journey, or about all of our journeys that we're on, is being in that space to recognize that being aware is one thing, taking action is another, and also recognizing that it is a journey. It is a process to walk through. And all of us, there's very few people that can say that I'm here. I've reached the end of my journey, right? And I don't have no more to learn. I think I think that's a little misnomer as well, right? Like I think one of the greatest things about being in this sense of reality that we're in now, it's like a big training ground for all of this, and working through this idea of disbelief about ourselves, who we are, the perception of ourselves, which is the real enemy. And uh, and I mean, it comes up in many different ways. You could say, like, well, surely this will correct itself, as in kind of being the more passive look at it, where you just kind of like, I'm just going to ignore it, and everything's going to just correct itself. It'll be all okay, and then yeah, and I'll just be able to go on my own, go my way. Or, oh well, this is just a temporary situation. So again, yeah, don't really have to worry about it. Or I'll leave it for somebody else to deal with it, right? Like somebody else is going to take care of it, because it's not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. And uh, and that really actually are all different things that there might be an element of truth to that, but more often than not, it's a fallacy, because when it comes to our own selves and what we're dealing with, uh, we're the first stop. We're the first person in all of our relationships. We're the first person in all everything that's happening in our lives, right? Like we're the common denominator in the life that is around us. Yes, there are outside influences, but we are that common denominator. And so, oftentimes, this idea of disbelief feels safer. Why? Because, well, if we take action, then we're exposing ourselves to something, and so it's easier for us to pull back than to take action. And right, like the idea of hiding, right? We've talked about that too. We want to hide because, well, we don't want to put ourselves out there. Taking action also leads to taking a risk, and a risk. Well, geez, I might get embarrassed. Somebody might say something. I may look a little odd, or I may have to go against the grain of what other people are thinking and stuff like that. And I don't really want to do that. It also leads to us having to take responsibility, and I mean, we live in a culture where everybody wants to blame everybody else for everything else that's going on in our lives. And and I mean, yes, as I said, there are outside influences that do happen. There are things that do happen, that other people say do to us or say to us or whatever. But there's an aspect of everything that happens in our lives where we're responsible for a part of that aspect, and it may not be, uh, it may not be, the exact action that was, attracting that exact action that happened towards us. But how do we respond to it? How do we react to it? All that kind of stuff, right? Those are all things that when we really look at it, how long do we want to dwell on it, right? If something happens to us that somebody else happened or that somebody else did to us, are we going to brew on it? Are we going to hold bitterness towards that person? Are we going to hold grudge? We're going to continue to play the victim. Are we going to allow it to park in our brains for years and years and years and cripple us, right? Like that, right? Those are things that we really have to be mindful of, and it just continues to spiral from there, and yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
So the idea of disbelief, this is something that a lot of people don't understand really well, and this is where they need to understand it most. The disbelief they are conditioned with is the disbelief of their own power and what they actually are capable of. And this is a huge point of frustration for me, because yes, when they have this disbelief of that responsibility, that they are responsible for making things happen, because men bear the mantle of leadership more than anyone else, and that leadership really looks like it looks like taking action, doing something. But when you have this sense of being told that no, this is not who you are, you have to be quiet, you have to keep your head down, you can't make waves, and because that's going to be bad, let someone else do it for you. That is when we have the sense of, okay, well, things are going to just work out. No, things are not just going to work out unless you actually do something to make it work out. And if it doesn't work out, it may not work in your favor, and that becomes the real risk. Or if they say this is probably temporary, it's only as temporary as you allow it to be, or it's only as permanent as you allow it to be. If you allow it to persist, it is going to persist. And if so, if you're looking for someone else to intervene, or if you're looking for someone else to do something, then you are part of the problem. You are part of allowing what is happening to happen, because Newton's first law of I forget if it was the first law, but Newton's first law: an object in motion will stay in motion unless an equal or an opposite force causes it to slow down or speed up. It's going to maintain its current course unless there is something else that stops it. And an object at rest will stay at rest unless there is something to make it move. These are both part of the same law of motion. And if you are waiting for someone else to do something, there's no guarantee someone else will. And this was an experiment done that was done in London, where at there were these stairs leading up to, I think, a government building, and they had this experiment where they had both a man and a woman in different areas, in different styles, dressing differently, doing different actions. And what this person would do is they would lay on the steps, both a man and a woman. And in most cases, people would just walk by or step over them, partly because they didn't want to deal with it, and they thought that someone else would take care of the situation. Very few times, I think it was only like 23% of the time, someone actually I think it was 35% for the woman and 13% for the man. When it was a woman that was in distress, 23%, 20 to 30% of the time, I think, I forget what the actual statistic was, someone would actually help the woman. It was still very low, but even lower for a man. It was way lower in the teens. That's what actually helped a man who was in distress. They either believed that they were homeless, or they believed that they were in some kind of mental condition, or they had brought this on themselves, which is weird considering that we've all been taught the exact same thing, that we have to wait for someone else to be in control of us. Yet, when we see someone in distress, we're like, oh, they cause it for themselves, especially if it's a man. That's part of the joke. And so we've been conditioned in this. And we believe that if we do take action, for the most part, we're going to expose ourselves. We're going to bring attention to ourselves, like you had said. And we're going to draw the wrong kind of attention, which risks embarrassment. And the sense of we're forced to actually do something or take responsibility for something we may not want to take responsibility for. And take responsibility in a way we don't want to. But again, this is just about the fear. This is just the fear talking, because we've been conditioned in the way that we have. And it's the conditioning that we have to really focus on as being the liability, not the taking action. The taking action is what we're supposed to do. Yes, we're going to be seen as unfavorable. Who cares? It's part of our job. We break eggs because that's how you make an omelet. But you have to be willing to do something. You have to be willing to risk embarrassment and not care. Because embarrassment is the judgment other people have on you. It is not necessarily a fact that you are doing something wrong. It is an uncomfortability of you disrupting the status quo. And responsibility, that is what you are supposed to be taking in it anyway. Taking responsibility in the way that you want is much better than taking responsibility as a reaction. Because when you take responsibility in the way that you want to, you are dictating, or at least having a say in how things end up, how things tend to resolve. And that is where the real power lies. One of the things that Deb Dana talks about in her book, Polyvagal Theory in Therapy, is the idea that the goal of life is to fall in love with life and enjoy the risk of living. Because life is a risk. You have no idea what's going to happen. There are no certainties. And this is true for every single person. Life is not certain. We're not living a script that you know how everything is going to happen, and that's a good thing. Because that it means that at any time you can decide the role you take on and how you want your life within reason to progress. And how you choose to exercise that is going to determine the kind of life that you live. And so the trap really becomes believing that you only have a certain set of responses to any given situation. And that's why that's what the cost of hesitating is. It's really just the belief that you are acting after you have lost leverage, the believing that there was leverage to lose. First of all, assessment does not mean you are losing leverage. It means that you're looking at a situation carefully. The leverage lost happens when you believe that you are left only with a certain set of responses after the hesitation, instead of seeing it as a way of being able to assess the situation and then act in the way that you believe that you should. So because of this, we tend to endure a cost. The selections we are left with create a cost, and this is why we hate them. Because they're going to make us feel like we are losing something in many different situations. In a relationship, we could feel like we are drifting apart from the person that we are with, because we believe that it is our only response to conflict. That because we feel a thing differently, because we feel like we can't talk about the situation, that we are drifting apart, and there's nothing we can do about that, which sucks. It also shows that our ability to have any kind of authority in the job that we take on, whether we are self-employed or we are employed by a company, that we lose the authority that we have. Well, I mean, first of all, you have to ask yourself, what kind of authority do I really have? The idea of authority, I think, is completely misunderstood. But also that we see that we believe that our own place and our own culture is being eroded. And this one is the most dangerous. When we believe that we are losing touch with our own culture, this creates a crisis of identity. And this is a big reason why we're seeing so many people, so many men, unalive themselves at such an alarming rate. Because we see that there's this hesitation that is creating this belief that we only have a certain set of situations, a certain set of responses. We hate them all, but we have to deal with them. But then that creates this belief that we are no longer identifying with our culture. And so we have this sense of rejection, this belief that we are being rejected from our culture. And really, we are self rejecting because we are buying into the belief that we only have a certain set of ways that we can contribute, or that we can act, or that we can respond. And it's a lie. And the more that we believe this, the more we're going to be faced with situations of crisis. And the more that this crisis is going to create real situations and real problems for men, and how this is going to erode the the natural identity of men's role in society, and that creates a much bigger and much more dangerous conversation.
It really does. And what you were talking about there when it comes to say like authority and stuff like that is what I've been reading in regards to. I've been reading a lot of John Maxwell books more recently, and he talks leadership more from a perspective of influence, and it's our ability to influence those around us. And when we have this heightened freeze dynamic that we've been talking about, and the psychological trap that we get into with that, it really hinders our ability to influence those around us, whether we're in an actual position of leadership, or even just as a person in our relationships or workplace or other places like that, as you mentioned. And you also alluded to like men, more having a higher tendency of unaliving themselves. I believe the statistic is 4 times more likely to, and that's staggering when you really think about it. 4 times more likely for a man to go to that extreme action. When it comes to how they respond to life because of where things are at. And I don't know about you, Jason, but I've had several people in my life that have gone to that point, and it's tragic. And oftentimes, when you look back at it, you're wondering like, well, could I have done something differently? Were there signs of that I could have noticed or talked to, like all that stuff. And we're also for people who are in that position, they're very good at hiding what kind of state they're in. Very few actually state that they have those intentions and stuff like that. So that makes it hard as well. But to kind of take things a little bit further in this discussion, there's actually a true purpose to this idea of freeze. And we've alluded to it a little bit before. I think you have too, right? When you talked about us being, say, kind of the hunter gatherer kind of times of our lives where we're out there, and we get the sense that something is around there. It's there to take an assessment of the situation that is around us, right? So that we're really just kind of, okay, what's happening here? That's that moment of pause that I talked about earlier too, right? Where you get this sensation, you get this stimulus, and we have that brief moment of pause where we can now look at the situation. Okay, what's happening here? And and we can look at, okay, is there a pattern here that has happened that I've noticed before in my life? Is there a choice that I can make in this moment? We see this we look at, like, say, high stress situations, or people who are, say, in the military or in a police force, or say even in the fire department, or any of those emergency response situations, right, where they're going into a space of threat, right? These people are usually very highly trained for those types of situations where they're in this high threat scenario, right? And they've been so well trained that, you know whether they're entering into a space, and they got weapons at the ready or whatever, and something pops up, they have that moment to look and assess that threat in the moment to see whether it is actually a threat, or if it is something that is just, that is not a threat. And so they got that, they've been conditioned to be able to make that strategic choice. And we're able to learn these skills, just in our everyday life as well, right? It's like those are extreme scenarios that those people have been put through and trained for, but we can also learn, we can learn those abilities ourselves for everyday functions in life. And so, yeah, that's something that I think is really important to understand as we continue this discussion.
Yeah, there is a purpose for the freeze response, and when it's used effectively, when it's used correctly, it can increase one's ability to act deliberately, act with purpose, and create an outcome that is desirable. So the freeze, when it's used properly, it's used as a brief assessment period. You freeze to um, assess the situation. And then once you have that assessment, what you're doing is you're looking to recognize patterns, because those patterns are going to help you understand, with that idea of heuristics, creating the pattern recognition, understanding what is likely to happen. It helps our model reboot, kind of, or give it a jolt forward, so we understand what's going on and what we need to do. And that allows us to make a strategic choice, so we know what we're supposed to do next. And this is really the thing that people in the military, police, fire, any kind of high stress situation, emergency doctors, EMS, anyone who does things that really deal with the most sensitive parts of human life, when they are when they have that practice of what they're supposed to do, the practice is what builds the habit, and the habit is that thing that creates that momentum. It is what creates that sense of, this is what I'm going to do. And we, as whether you're a veteran who's become a civilian, or you have just been a civilian your entire life, it doesn't matter. The idea is that you can still create the right kinds of patterns, the right kinds of habits that are going to help you take that freeze to understand how to use it as a brief assessment period, instead of looking at it as a final state, looking at it as, okay, well, I'm just supposed to freeze and do nothing else. I don't know what else to do. And then um, other people see that freeze. They're not looking at you as someone who is doing something. They're looking at that pause as being analysis paralysis, someone who can't make a decision. And instead, being able to pause briefly, act deliberately, and use that time to also speak to others, communicate with others what you're doing and how you could use their help. Because if you're in a free situation, you're probably in a free situation with someone else, or you're in a free situation with someone else who's in a active situation, like a fight or flee. And being able to direct them, or whether they're in a freeze or they're in a activated state, can help them also come out of that and then act with purpose instead of act out of instinct. And it's really important to understand how powerful this freeze can be, because the freeze sense can be an ability to gain awareness, and from that awareness we understand how we need to move, and that movement is what creates the or helps to contribute to the result that we want to see. We can't control the result, but we can help to affect it through our actions. So if you look at it as a useful tool, you see the freeze response as being something that helps you buy time to assess the situation, to act deliberately, consciously, and mindfully.
Yeah, and that's important to really understand because you know when you think about acting deliberately and really moving into the next thing, it I mean, yes, it can be a short pause. Yes, it can be a longer pause. But the more we delay something as well can be detrimental, right? So it's about really understanding a proper time frame in which we make a decision and we take action. And as you said, that we start to eliminate the idea of this analysis paralysis kind of idea, because we live in a world that is very fluid. And sometimes, yes, there is some grace to be able to leave things for a moment longer to make, a better decision. But sometimes, we don't have that time. We have to take action now in the moment. Otherwise, something, can be detrimental as depending on what the scenario is. And so, but the truth is though is like it's about actually taking those steps, getting past. They say oftentimes that the best way to find courage in something isn't to eliminate the fear, it's just actually stepping into doing something, and recognizing, okay, this scenario, these are my options. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to step forward and I'm going to do it. And then, okay, you know what? Recognizing, oh, wait a second, that wasn't so bad. Okay. And then you build from there, right? And you keep, and you keep, stepping out, and over time you build your confidence in your ability to make those choices. And they're not always going to necessarily be favorable and stuff like that. But instead of looking at it as a failure, you can look at it as an opportunity of learning. Okay, I did this and it didn't go the way I thought it would. What can I learn from that? And so we really got to kind of again, it all talks about reframing the mind as we've been talking about this throughout the entire thing. And so and so that's where we're getting to, is this idea of reframing the mind or retraining the mind, or learning to make a transition from this idea of being in. It's not that the freeze doesn't go away. It's how do we use that freeze strategically, right? And so how do we take it from being where, okay, I'm going to freeze, I'm going to avoid, I'm not going to whatever, and all the passive things, to where, okay, I can now shorten that time to where I can make that strategic decision and just take a step forward. And we've talked about, we made this word has been brought up forward lots of times, the idea of awareness, right? Awareness of what's happening within our body, right? The physical cues. Does our chest tighten up? Does our breathing become more shallow or faster paced? Is our mind going a million miles a minute? Are we having these loop thoughts that just keep wanting to cycle and cycle and cycle? How can we even just pause that and take a short breath, or not short breath, but a deeper breath, to have that pause, to recenter ourselves, to kind of get ourselves back into that space of calmness, right? And from there, like, okay, what am I seeing, right? Like, what am I seeing? Okay, this is what I'm seeing, and then can we distinguish, okay, is this the reality, or is this is what I'm perceiving? Because there's a difference between the two, and I'm not here to say what is what. I mean, we've all heard these scenarios of people who have been in the exact same situation. They're side by side, they're experiencing the same thing, but their perception of it can be completely different. And so, but we got to understand, what am I seeing? What how can I put a name to that? Do I need to set a boundary around that? Do I need to seek guidance around that? And how, like there's so many different things that come into play when we are learning to change the initial response in our lives. And sometimes, like that's even just changing our posture, right? A lot of times people get into this fight or this freeze kind of aspect. They cower down, they kind of hunch or whatever. But what would it look like if you were to kind of sit up and roll your shoulders back and just change your posture and stuff like that? That can really go a long ways to create a mental shift for you when it comes to this transition that we're talking about.
And really, this is the most important thing that you can walk away with is that the freeze is always going to be there. It's just being able to have that awareness, to shorten it, to use it as a tool rather than seeing it as a liability. And like you had said, Jason, the things you need to do is first of all notice what those physical cues are, like you had said, and noticing what is going on. And these are the physiological responses, the body responses that are going on, what I call sensations. And the sensations, these are the things that usually create the emotional reactions. The emotional reaction being safe, not safe. It's a binary choice. There's an understanding of, am I safe or am I unsafe? And if you have that tightening of the chest, if you have that shallow breathing, which goes along with it, this is a stress response. And that stress response often creates that mental looping, that almost panic, if you will, of being around, being able to identify those things, being able to just after a situation, being able to say, this is what happened, and observing how you have in the past reacted, being able to dissect these into these things that we can observe, rather than having judgment, just create them as observations, and being able to just talk about them. Okay, so this is what I saw, and this is how it made me feel. This is what the emotional reaction that I had was. I felt a sense of panic and that I couldn't do anything. Great, fantastic. You've identified what went on, because that is the first thing to do, is to be able to identify that. When you're setting a boundary, what this means is identifying what you want to achieve and knowing what needs to happen in order to achieve that. What are the changes you have to make? Why these changes are important? And what is at stake if you don't make these changes? And by understanding those things, you'll be able to establish, and then reinforce that boundary. And it doesn't happen overnight. These things happen slowly. It's not like you wake up one day and boom, you have a well-established boundary that is going to reframe your freeze from being long and creating hesitation to being short and creating awareness. It doesn't work that way. It takes time to develop this. But as you condition that boundary slowly and over time, and as you understand where, okay, this is what I still need to develop in order to make this boundary stronger, kind of like working a muscle, the way that these develop is just like how you would develop muscles, how you would develop yourself as a fit person. This is the mental and emotional fitness. And that's when you can start asking yourself direct questions of, what else am I missing that I need to work on that is going to help to develop this? And what changes in my posture and tone are going to help to reinforce this? And this is as much for you as it is to communicate to other people, because all development starts understanding how you build yourself up. You can't lead anyone else if you can't properly lead yourself. And so the process of doing this is helping to lead yourself out of a situation that you don't desire, or that you have a strong aversion to, and transition that slowly over time to something that you really respect and that you admire about yourself. And this is what it means to be a man, to develop this leadership quality about yourself that you can then transmit to others through your actions. Other people are going to see you as someone that is reliable, someone that is capable, someone that is consistent in the way they deal with situations and deal with them in a way that is responsible. And so when people see you as someone like that, they're more willing to follow you. They're more willing to take your advice. They're more willing to depend on you. And that is really what it's all about, being able to take that free situation, use that as a tool, and then apply that to everyday situations that other people can see. So they can say, damn, this person has their shit together. There's someone that I really want to get to know better. And that is when you know that the freeze instinct no longer defines who you are. It no longer defines how you react to things. It no longer has a hold on you. Instead, you are using it as a tool, just as you were meant to use everything within you as a tool. You have the only thing that you can control is yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, your decisions, and your actions. Your thoughts create the story that you tell yourself, and your feelings create the emotional state that you put yourself in. Those are two things that you get to control. After the emotional reaction, when you are aware of how that is making you, how that is affecting you, and what you want to do instead, that is the ability of changing the story you tell yourself and the state that you put yourself in. It's very effective. And then when you're able to affect this, you're able to determine how long you stay frozen and what that freeze means. Are you aware or are you reactive? Being aware creates a much better sense of what you can do. And this creates an upgrade of your entire person. Changes one thing. The how you use your freeze response can be one of the most effective ways that you demonstrate yourself as a capable leader. And it can really be the change that you've been looking for in your own life. And it's just kind of ironic that this is really one of the few areas that we actually do have any kind of control of. That once we begin to exercise, it changes everything.
Yeah, that's really well said, Jason. I mean, as I've said before, right? Like we are the common denominator in everything in our lives. And so it really honestly does start with ourselves as individuals. And you know, we yes, we can seek out outside help and all that other kind of stuff, and that's what Jason and I are here for, is to, just speak life into your guys' lives, the people of our audience and stuff like that, to bring the things that we've learned on our journey as we've gone through life and stuff like that forward, so that we can just share it with you guys, so that you can learn from our experiences and what we've learned and everything. But it ultimately, it like, we can't make the changes in your life for you. It comes down to yourself, right? Like, like even accountability. You can say, well, I want accountability, and you can bring people into your lives to be accountable to. But at the end of the day, you're still responsible for the actions that you take in your life. It's not the person that's holding you accountable that's responsible for those actions, or whatever it is that you're wanting them to help you out with, right? It ultimately comes down to yourself, and that's where the idea is of lead by example comes into play. And so when we do understand what we're talking about here with the freeze is actually a feature, as we've kind of talked about throughout the whole time, and it's our opportunity to use that as a proper tool to be able to assess our situation, to be able to and to be able to grow from there. And it's something that we're all capable of, something that every single one of us is capable of. And um, I like the idea of, a lot of people like, you know they go into the shame language, right? I'm broken, or I'm this, I'm that. Well, no, I don't think anybody's actually really ever broken. They just haven't learned how to um, how to reframe the script in their mind. You know, it's not about fixing yourself. It's about just learning how to do something differently. I think would be just a better way to phrase it, right? And that's something that we're all capable of doing. And so that's the encouragement I would love to leave with you guys today is that you are capable of more than what you think you are. You are capable of using this freeze that we've been talking about today as a tool that it was designed for us to have, I believe, to be able to have that moment of assessment, to be able to learn from, and to give us the strength to make the choices and to take action.
Yeah, and one thing that I would like to really emphasize is that there is a choice. You can see your freeze response as a liability or as a feature. This is the choice that every man has to make for himself. This is what you have to decide you're going to use as. Are you going to use it as a liability and continue to be a victim, or are you going to see it as a tool and mold that tool to how you want the world to, or how you want to see the world and the outcomes that you want to contribute to, and really be an author of your life? You have to be the one to choose that. And when you make the determination of what you want to choose, then you have the ability to dictate what that choice means for you and how other people react to you because of the choices that you have made in regards to how you see your freeze response. It's always going to be there. The only thing you have to do is decide if it's going to be a liability that you react to or a tool that you use proactively.
Yeah, well said, Jason. And so as we conclude today, I just want to thank you guys all for being here, and I want to encourage all of you to do the usual stuff, right? To share our content with those who you believe would benefit from it, to your friends, family, coworkers. Uh, like, subscribe to our channel, and we're here to serve. So until next time, bye for now.
Take care.